So great to have you guys here today. Happy Father's Day. My name is Justin. I'm one of the pastors here. If you're a guest with us, we're so excited that you're here today. I know you could be a lot of different places on Father's Day, including the golf course, because I think it just stopped raining. And so we're pumped that you guys are here today. And I'm excited to talk about this whole idea of what it looks like to be a dad that has a heroic faith in God. We're going to dive into that in just a second. But before we do, I just want to talk to those of us that maybe kind of struggle on Father's Day. We're celebrating dads today, which I think is awesome. Hopefully you're going to leave here encouraged and with a smile on your face and not feeling like you got kicked while you were down. But I think for some of us, even as we were singing some of those songs today, maybe some of the words were harder to sing than others because maybe you don't have a good relationship with your dad. Or maybe you really want to be a dad and that opportunity hasn't come to fruition like you thought it would at this point in your life. And either you can't have kids, or you haven't gotten married, or haven't found the right person to spend your life with and have a family, whatever that looks like. I think for many of us, we equate our relationship with our earthly father with our relationship with our heavenly Father, and so sometimes it's harder to relate to God when we have a wounded relationship with our earthly dad. And so no matter where you are this Father's Day, if you're just celebrating being a dad, if you have a phenomenal relationship with your dad, or if you're really struggling with this whole idea of Father's Day, I have mixed emotions when it comes to Father's Day. I have I have an amazing relationship with my kids. I have a wounded relationship with my dad. And so even this morning, I texted my dad kind of as an act of obedience, just saying, "Hey, Dad, I love you. Happy Father's Day." And when I hit send, I felt like this release because I just knew that it was the right thing to do. And one of the things I want to say up front is, if you struggle with your relationship with your earthly father, I just want to remind you that God isn't a reflection of your earthly father. He's the perfection of your earthly father. And so hopefully, as we go through the message today, you'll be able to reconnect or connect with God in a new way, just keeping that in mind, even if you have a broken or wounded relationship with your earthly dad. Well, when our oldest son, Micah, was 3, he turned 3 years old. We got him this little kid's bike for his birthday. And I wasn't really that impressed with it because it had training wheels, and I just didn't really think training wheels kind of signified the prodigy that I thought my kid was going to be. And so I just thought it kind of just illuminated weakness, all right? Like if you need training wheels, like you're just not coordinated enough to ride a real bike. And so we give him the gift of the training wheel bike, and as I'm even giving the gift to him, I'm putting him on the bike, and I might just say, "Hey, buddy, I want you to know that I believe the best of you, all right? And I think you're going to be amazing at everything and probably professional at several things, okay? And so I want you to know that you have 1 year to learn how to ride this bike without training wheels. And if you can learn to ride this little kid's bike without training wheels on your 4th birthday, I will get you a big kid's bike. And it's going to be amazing, and you're going to fly around the neighborhood just like all the neighbors. It's going to be awesome." He's like, "Really?" I said, "Yes. So let's learn how to ride this weak bike, and then we'll get on to the main course of the big boy bike." And so I didn't know what I was doing as a dad. I was first time as a dad. I was kind of going through this for the first time. My wife thought I was kind of crazy. And so, I just knew that his ability to ride a bike without training wheels was a direct reflection of my ability as a father. I knew that to be true. And so we get through the next 11 months, and it's about a month before his 4th birthday, and we have not done any work on riding this bike without training wheels. And he reminds me of my promise the year before. "Remember, Dad, you said that I could get a big boy bike if I learned to ride my bike without training wheels. Let's take off my training wheels." And so I didn't want to go cold turkey, and so I just took off one training wheel. All right, and so I didn't know okay, don't judge me. And so he literally was riding around like this for the next week or so, and it actually explains a lot about who he is today, because he didn't know, I'm just joking. And so he rides around with this one training wheel, and I'm like, that does not look right, and I don't think that looks coordinated. And so we took off the other training wheel, and about a week before his 4th birthday, we're out there running up and down in front of the house, and if you guys have ever taught your kids how to ride a bike without training wheels, there's failure after failure after failure, and you're exhausted because you're holding on to the thing, and you're all sore, and you're like, "I can't keep up with you." And then this light bulb goes off, and they just get it, right? And so he just takes off, and I hear music playing, right? And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, Dad of the Year." I'm already coordinating myself, Father of the Year, and he just takes off. And I'm like, "Way to go, buddy." And we never talked about how to stop. And he's like, "How do I stop?" I'm like, "Just fall over." And he just lets the bike go, and it goes flying into the curb or whatever. And I'm like, "That was amazing." I come running down the street. I'm like, "That was amazing. Give me a high five." I'm like, "Let's see if you can do it again." So I get him back on the bike. I push him. Sure enough, he goes right in the opposite direction. I'm like, oh my gosh. And so I said, hey, you got to go get your mom, because she refused to watch this whole thing play out. She was in the house. And so I said, hey, go get mom and let's show her. So Trish comes out and I said, watch this. This is how amazing I am. I mean, how amazing Micah is. I said, Micah, take off. So he gets on his bike, takes off and starts riding. And Trish is like, that's awesome, buddy. Good job. You know, she applauds, goes back in the house. So Mike and I are standing there and I start thinking, I said, buddy, do you want to take this to the next level? He's like, what do you mean? I said, well, there are kids that when they know how to ride a bike without training wheels, they can ride with one hand. I said, I think that you're good enough to ride with one hand. I think you can do that. He's like, really? I said, yes, you have amazing balance. You can ride with one hand. I said, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put you on the bike. I'm going to push you. Once you go down, I want you to turn around and come back toward me, because he still didn't know how to stop. I said, turn around and come back toward me, and then I'll tell you when to take your hand off. He's like, all right. So I push him. He goes down, turns around, comes back. He's perfect line, just that immaculate turn. It was just awesome. I said, okay, buddy, one hand. Sure enough, rides right back to me with one hand. I'm like, oh my gosh, that was amazing. So I said, okay, I think we can go to advanced level right now. He's like, what do you mean? I said, let's see if you can ride your bike with no hands. He's like, really? I said, yeah. I said, people ride their bike with no hands all the time. I mean, it would be amazing if you could ride this bike with no hands. It would just make me feel really good about myself. And so I put him on the bike. I said, okay, I want you to go down and turn around. I want you to come back. I'll say, take off one hand. And then I would say, take off both hands, and we'll see how you do, okay? He's like, all right. So he goes down the street, turns around, comes back. I said, all right, one hand. Sure enough, he takes off his one hand. I said, all right, no hands. He takes off, boom, just right into the pavement. He doesn't say a word. He stands up, looks at me, and runs in the house. And I have a countdown in my mind of how long I have to live. And I just start thinking 10, 9, 8. Sure enough, before I even get to 6, front door flies open. Tricia comes screaming out of the house right into the front yard. She's like, are you crazy? I'm like, what are you talking about? She's like, you made him ride his bike with no hand. I'm like, well, made is a really strong word. I didn't hold a gun to his head. I didn't say, you're grounded unless you ride your bike with no hands. I just issued a challenge, and he rode his bike with no hands. She's like, that is so psychotic. She's like, he's going to need counseling for years. I said, but he knows how to ride his bike with no hands. I'm like, wrecking is a part of the process. It's a part of life. He has to learn to deal with it. She's like, that is unbelievable. She's like, I can't believe it. I said, hey, Kaylee is out here riding her bike with no hands. She's just taunting us with her no-hand bike riding all over the place. And Tricia's like, Kaylee's 11. So immediately after that conversation, I went and bought a big boy bike. And that's Micah with his big boy bike. And he is forcing that smile on his face. Really, that smile says, I hate my dad. That's what that says, but I got this bike. That's what he's saying right there. And so I tell you that story to illustrate this fact that as dads, we want the best for our kids. Sometimes we don't always execute what is best for our kids in the right way, right? Like, we have great intentions, we just don't necessarily always come through on those intentions. Right? So we want to be heroes for our kids, but the way that we try to execute some of the things in our life or in our family or in our relationship with the kids is less than heroic. But there's that desire, right? We each have a desire to pass something on to our kids that leaves a legacy. And as my kids have gotten older, I think, especially in this season of life, one of the things that I'm asking myself these days is, how do I want my kids to remember me? Not that I'm planning on dying anytime soon, but I'm out of the instruction phase for at least 2 of my kids, and I'm more into the coaching phase of those kids. And so I'm asking myself, what is my legacy? How do I want them to remember me? Because I'm not going to be able to guide them and instruct them and boss them around. All they're going to have is the memory of the things that I have told them to guide them from this point forward. Obviously, they can text me, they can call me, they can talk to me. But as far as daily interaction, it's the legacy of faith that I have deposited in them that's going to make the biggest difference in this stage of their life. And I think for all of us dads, that's the biggest question that we have to answer is, how are our kids going to remember us? What is the legacy of faith that we're leaving behind for those that we love the most? And I think, if I'm honest, as I look at this at Scripture, I think that's why Hebrews chapter 11 was written. I think that God knew that we would need something to look to, that we would need something to guide us in what an heroic faith looks like. Hebrews chapter 11 is oftentimes called the Hall of Faith, kind of a play on words of the Hall of Fame, because it lists ordinary people who lived extraordinary lives, not because they were amazing people in and of themselves, but because they had an extraordinary faith in God. And the writer of Hebrews over and over and over again through every verse of chapter 11 says these two words, by faith. Before every single person who is listed in Hebrews chapter 11 is listed, two words precede their name, by faith, by faith, by faith. By faith Abel, by faith Enoch, by faith Noah, by faith Abraham, by faith Isaac, by faith Jacob, by faith Joseph, by faith Moses, by faith Rahab. By faith is the most common term that's stated all throughout Hebrews chapter 11. And then in verse 32 it says this. The writer says, how much more do I need to say? It would take too long to recount the stories of faith of Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah and David and Samuel and all the prophets. By faith, these people overthrew kingdoms and ruled with justice and received what God had promised them. They shut the mouths of lions, they quenched the flames of fire, and they escaped death by the edge of the sword. Their weakness was turned to strength. They became strong in battle, and they put whole armies to flight. What I love about Hebrews chapter 11 is this chapter really ties heroism to faith. We tie heroism to deeds. We tie heroism to acts of courage. This chapter in Scripture ties heroism directly to faith. In chapter 11 alone, the word faith is used 27 times. 27 times in one chapter. It's there for emphasis. And what made these men and women great that are listed there wasn't all the things that they did, and it wasn't their social status, and it wasn't their Twitter followers, and it wasn't their business acumen, and it wasn't their financial portfolio or their athletic ability. What made them so great was the way that they demonstrated their faith. They really weren't great people. They just had faith in a great God. It was faith that set them apart. And so what I want to do this morning is I want to kind of look at two observations about faith from this passage, and then I want to talk about kind of a pathway that as dads and really as people, this isn't necessarily gender specific or parental stage specific, how we can pursue a heroic faith. And the first observation I would say is this: heroes of faith often rise from obscurity, which is countercultural and counterintuitive to how we think heroes are recognized in our culture. You see, this list contains no born political leader. There's no person with born power or influence in this list in Hebrews chapter 11. This is a list of dysfunctional, messed up, sinful people. Abel was murdered by his jealous brother. Abraham doubted God's promise. Jacob was a deceiver. Moses murdered a guy. Rahab was a prostitute. David had an affair. They were all just a bunch of nobodies who actually messed up a lot of their life, and then God came in and redeemed them, and God came in and used them in powerful ways because of their faith. They became heroes of our faith because they were more concerned about God's kingdom than they were their own kingdom. They didn't obey God to build a platform. They obeyed God to build the kingdom of God. They wanted God's name to be great. And as I look at this list, I think through different seasons of my life where I have leveraged and used God to make myself look great. I've tried to manipulate, or I've tried to portray a more put together version of myself to make myself look better, and use God and use spirituality to do that. But that's not how these people worked. They were completely obscure. They were completely unknown. They had no voice in their culture until God did something through them. And God only did something through them because they were willing to demonstrate faith. The second observation is heroes of faith live with availability. We've talked about this principle before, but there are three words that are said by every single person that's listed in Hebrews chapter 11. And those three words are, here am I. Here am I. Here am I to offer you sacrifices. Here am I to build an ark. Here am I to leave my home and walk to a land that you'll give me. Here am I to sacrifice my son. Here am I to lead your people to the promised land. Here am I to cross the Red Sea. Here am I. And I wonder, guys, if we don't experience more moments of heroic faith in our life, I wonder if we live with a sense of discontentment in our relationship with God because we're simply just not available for them. Like there's moments that God has set aside for us, but we're too busy or too preoccupied or too distracted to actually experience those moments. We're not available. God can only use the parts of our heart that are available to Him. Our availability has conditions. I'll give to God, just not my money. I'll forgive God, just not that one family member. I'll love people, God, just not that one person in my office that's really hard to love. I'll give you all of me, God, just not that part of me that I like to keep to myself on the weekends. I'll be honest, God, just not about the sin that no one knows about. And maybe our faith isn't heroic as we thought it was going to be when we first became a follower of Christ, Not because we don't have great intentions, but because there's parts of our heart that God simply doesn't have access to. And we give him parts of us, just not all of us. And what I love about Hebrews chapter 11, if you go back and look at it this afternoon or later on this week, is these people, they were not great people of influence. They were just people that allowed God to influence them greatly. And that changed everything. It changed everything about their life. And so how do we become a hero of faith? How do we live our lives in such a way that we leave a legacy of faith for those that matter most to us? And so I want to spend the rest of our time this morning talking about a guy that we know very little about. He's mentioned in the Bible actually twice, which actually just means the rest of this message is going to be really short. Okay, we know very little about this guy. He's only mentioned twice. There's not a lot of information. But his name is Enoch. And he might not even be someone that you've ever heard of. He doesn't get a lot of fanfare. But I think Enoch and what is said about Enoch gives us a roadmap, especially as fathers, of what it looks like to have a heroic faith and to pass that faith on to our kids. Hebrews chapter 11, verses 5 and 6 says this: "It was by faith that Enoch was taken up to heaven without dying. He disappeared because God took him. For before he was taken up, he was known as a person who pleased God. And it's impossible to please God without faith. Anyone who wants to come to him must believe that God exists and that he rewards those who sincerely seek him." So here's the deal with Enoch. We know nothing about him except this: he did not die, which is kind of freaky. All right, if you really think about that, all right, he shares that distinction with two people, Jesus and Elijah. All right, that's a pretty elite group of people. And Jesus actually did die. He just rose from the dead, okay, and then went up to heaven alive. So if you ask me, how does that even happen? How is that even possible? I'll just say, people who rise from the dead and people who are taken up to heaven, ascensions and resurrections, I just don't touch, okay? I have no idea how to explain them, and if I did know how to explain them, it would not really look good for God, right? Because God does things that aren't explainable, and I'm okay with it. Like, if you want to make someone go to heaven without dying, all power to you, God, okay? I can't explain that, but that's what the Bible says. And he's one of three people who actually go to heaven while living. Enoch's faith was so impressive to God, God just takes him to heaven. Now, Enoch is first mentioned in the Bible in Genesis chapter 5. Genesis is the first book of the Bible, and all throughout the Old Testament primarily, and even at the beginning of the New Testament, there's these things called genealogies, right? It just lists people, and this is a way that we know the Bible is true because people are listed for historical accuracy, okay? So they're not there just to be boring so you can just skip over the chapter when you see a genealogy. The writer of that book or the writer of that letter, whatever is being written, are listing those people so that you know there's a historical account of everything that's taken place after their names are listed. And Enoch was first mentioned in Genesis chapter 5. And what's amazing about Genesis chapter 5, it's known as the graveyard chapter. After every single person in Genesis chapter 5 that is mentioned, these words follow their name. And then he died. 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 Verse 5, 8, 11, 14, 17, 20, 27, and 31 all say, and then he died. It's over. Like that's all we know about him. But in verse 24, there's a break in the pattern. Genesis chapter 5, verses 21 through 24 says this: "When Enoch had lived 65 years, he became the father of Methuselah." Now, those of you that have heard, some of the Old Testament before, or even, if you aren't really familiar with the Bible, you may have heard Methuselah's name because he is referenced as the oldest person to ever live, okay? So he was Enoch's son. After he became the father of Methuselah, Enoch walked faithfully with God for 300 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Now, some of you know how that feels, right? When your big brother is always mentioned and then you're just other sons and daughters, right? And that's what happens here in the Bible, right? It's just the older brother syndrome. Methuselah gets all the credit. Okay, he was so old. All right, we get it. Other sons and daughters, all right? So even in the Bible, it's not perfect, and they probably had to go to counseling for that, but that's okay. All right, altogether, Enoch lived a total of 365 years. Now, look at verse 24. Enoch walked faithfully with God, and then he was no more because God took him away. We don't know much about Enoch except this: his faith was so impressive to God. God did not want him to experience the pain of death after 365 years. And so he just took him away. He's taken directly to heaven. And I don't know what a definition of heroic faith is for you, but if I had to define it or identify it, I think walking faithfully with God in such a way that he doesn't want me to experience death, I think that qualifies as kind of heroic. And so I just want to lay out for us just how can we pursue a heroic faith, 3 ingredients that I think can get us there. And these aren't exhaustive, but I think they all fit into what we want to be and who we want to become as people. And the first is a heroic faith pursues God. A heroic faith pursues God. Look at how Enoch pursues God. Verse 6, it's impossible to please God without faith. Anyone who wants to come to him must believe that God exists, and he rewards those who sincerely seek him. Like there's this call not to perfection, but to pursuit. Right? You know that, right? Like God doesn't call you to be perfect, he calls you to pursue him. Life change happens in your life, not as you try to be perfect, because you're never going to be. Life change happens in your life as you pursue God. God then shows up and does something that you can't do, and that's transform your heart. About 3 years ago, I was doing marriage counseling for this couple. They were 3 years into marriage and not doing well, and we're sitting talking, and they're sitting on opposite sides of the couch. So you know you're in a bad spot when you don't even sit next to your spouse in a counseling appointment to like fake it for the counselor. And so I'm sitting there and they're on opposite sides of the couch, and she's going off about how disrespectful he is, and she's going and how disconnected he is, and he's not present, and he's always working, and he's going off about every time he is present. All she does is point out all the things that are wrong with him, and so they're just missing each other. And they started out like really close together in their marriage, and then over the course of 3 years, she was pursuing law, he was pursuing music, and it just kind of faded away. And so they're sitting there and they're just going back and forth, and I'm not taking notes. I'm like the guys in the recliner, I'm asleep. Okay, I'm just like, okay, we're getting nowhere here. And so I said to him, tell me about your engagement. How'd you propose? Her eyes just lit up. She's like, oh my gosh, that was epic. I'm like, really? I'm like, tell me about it. She's like, oh, well, I had no idea what was going on. I just knew that he left me this note on my windshield of my car and said, get in the car and follow the GPS. And he pre-programmed all of these destinations in my GPS that tracked different seasons of our dating life. And she's like, so we would go, I went this place and to this restaurant. And then she's like, I went to this rooftop part of this parking garage where we parked on our very first date. And the waiter that waited on us for our first date, he tracked him down and served me the dessert that I ordered on our very first date. And I'm just thinking, I suck as a husband right now, right? I'm just listening to the story. I'm like, this is amazing, right? She's like, and not only did he pre-program my GPS to go to all these destinations, and they had these little notes, or they had friends of ours waiting there that told us a story about why this place was significant, or why he had me go to this place. She's like, he programmed an iPod in my car and played songs on the way. And I'm like, none of us are worthy is what I'm thinking. Like, this guy is amazing. And so she's just going on and on and on. And you can see he's like kicking back. He's like, I am awesome. And for probably 10 minutes, she tells me the story. Beaming. And I said, how much effort have you put into your marriage since the proposal? Like, have you put any type of intentionality into your marriage that you put in that proposal? Because that proposal's epic. That's one day. That's one day. He's like, well, I wanted her to say yes. I was trying to get her to say yes. She said yes. We're good now. And I said, you can never expect your marriage to be good until you give your marriage the same effort you gave your proposal. It's not going to happen. And I said, this isn't rocket science, guys. Marriage is tough, but it's not complicated. When you pursue your career more than you pursue your wife isn't going to be happy. When you pursue law and your career and getting promoted and becoming partner more than you pursue your husband isn't going to be happy. I'm not really like, Dr. Phil, but I only have an undergraduate degree, but I think I'm pretty right on that. And they just kind of scooted a little closer together, right? Because the engagement story broke the ice. And I just said, hey, if you guys walk out of here and you don't pursue one another with the same reckless abandon that you pursued the epic proposal, this isn't going to last. And I'm not trying to be like a downer. I'm just being a realist. And I think the same thing happens in our relationship with God. Like we stop pursuing God, and we start pursuing career, and we start pursuing hobbies, and we start pursuing the busyness of life, and we say yes to things that make us busy because we think they make us valuable, and we lose our pursuit of God. And we wonder why we're on a plateau with God. We wonder why our faith isn't growing. We wonder, it's not really rocket science. Like, God rewards those who earnestly seek him. And he's not forcing it on you. He's just saying, this is the reality. You're never going to have a good friendship unless you pursue it. You're never going to have a great dating relationship unless you prioritize it. You're never going to have a great marriage unless you are intentional about it. And the same thing is true in our relationship with God. And so I don't know what that looks like for you. But if you want to grow in your faith, you're going to have to pursue God. Maybe it's spending more time alone with God. Maybe it's praying or reading the Bible for the very first time. Maybe for some of you, it's creating some space or some margin in your busy life just to get quiet. Maybe for some of you, pursuing God is going to play out by joining a connection group this fall as we relaunch another semester of connection groups in August. Getting in a circle in homes with other people, talking about faith. Maybe for some of you, it's joining a team here at Hope City and kind of pursuing God as you serve other people through the cafe or Hope City Kids or our tech team or setup team or First Impressions, which is absolutely killing it today. Right? I can still smell bacon from the stage right now. All right? That's amazing. And maybe that's what pursuing God looks like for you. But I know that until you start pursuing God, your faith isn't going to look any different. Pursuing God is more than having good intentions. It's actually being intentional. And for all of us, that looks different. I think the church has gotten it wrong because we have cookie-cutter discipleship, but we haven't taken into account that we're all different people. And so each of us are in a different place, and we're all wired differently. And so what pursuing God looks like for you is different than what it looks like for me. And until we're okay with that, we're never going to really have an authentic relationship with God. I can go on about that, but I'm not. Secondly, a heroic faith is one that takes risks. And I'm not talking about risk for the sake of thrill seeking. I'm talking about the belief that God can be trusted and that he is going to do what he says he's going to do in your life. And oftentimes stepping out in faith and taking risk is uncomfortable and it's scary, and God will ask you to trust him in ways that don't make sense. And the chances of failure often seem high, but that's why it's faith. Hebrews chapter 11 is an interesting chapter because it mentions this guy named Abraham. And Abraham's name wasn't even Abraham when he first came into a relationship with God. It was Abram. And he was living in this country called Hebron. And some scholars don't even believe that Abraham and his family were even walking with God at the time. But they had accumulated immense wealth. They had all kinds of livestock. They had all kinds of property. They were very well off. They were very well respected. And God comes to Abraham and he says, hey, I'm going to change your name. I'm going to change your location. I'm going to change your life. And I'm going to use you to be the father of the nation of Israel. And the Savior of the world is going to come through your lineage. Well, Abraham wasn't able to have kids at that time. He was 100 years old. So the odds were not in his favor. And he wasn't able to have kids. And he took a chance and just believed God. And God said, okay, well, I want you to move. I want you to leave your childhood home. I want you to leave everything that is known to you. I want you to leave everything that's comfortable, everything that's predictable. And I want you to go to a land that I'm going to give you. And Abraham's like, cool, where's it at? He's like, I'm not going to tell you. Just start moving. Pack up everything and just start going. And Abraham took this chance with God and did. He leveraged everything. He followed God. And he wasn't perfect along the way. Right? He had a kid out of wedlock with his servant. So it wasn't like this perfect picture of obedience. It was just this consistent reliance and willingness to take risks and to trust God that God was going to do what he said he was going to do, even when Abraham didn't do what he was supposed to do. Author Gene Edwards says this. He says, beginning empty-handed and alone frightens the best of men. It also speaks volumes of just how sure they are that God is with them. I don't know if you've ever felt empty-handed or alone, but if you do, your pursuit and your willingness to say yes to God in those moments is an assurance of just how much you think that God is with you. I think heroic faith isn't about taking giant leaps of faith. It's just about taking small steps of obedience. And what we see in our culture and what we see in the church are these people who look like they've taken these giant leaps of faith. And you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they did that. What it has actually been is a culmination of small little steps of obedience that add up to gigantic steps of faith. And many of you guys have been so supportive and so encouraging and have blown up our phone and email and inbox on Facebook, which I love. And I'm just so grateful for this community of this adoption process that we're in. And by process, I mean like Mach 4, like Tom Cruise, Top Gun speed level of adoption process, because it's been about 2.5 weeks. And so it's been a lot to take in. It's been emotional. And singing songs today about God choosing us and that we're sons and daughters of him. And I mean, it just washes over you in a new way when you're in that process of choosing to take on kids as your own. And many of the emails and many of the comments that you have said and the other people across the country that we're connected with have said is, man, you and Trisha's faith is just unbelievable. It's just huge. It's just a big step of faith. And I don't want to minimize that. I don't want to push that to the side. But I do want to say that was just the next yes for us. I'm not minimizing it because it is a huge decision and it'll alter our life. But it was just the next yes. It was just something that we just needed to say yes to. And if you want to know how to grow in your faith, if you want to know how to start taking risks for God in your faith, say yes to him more than you say no. That's how you grow. Because you're not always going to say yes. But if you say yes more than you say no, you know what's going to happen? God is going to show up. And he's going to come through, and he's going to be faithful every time you say yes. And you know what that's going to do? It's going to give you confidence to say yes again. It's going to give you confidence to say yes the next time, and then the next time, and then the next time. And then people are going to look at you and go, oh my gosh, how in the world have you quit your job and you're going in a whole different direction? It's because you just said yes. And what looks drastic to them is just natural to you. And I'm not saying adopting 2 kids is natural, okay? I'm freaking out, all right? I cried myself to sleep last night, okay? So I'm not saying that. There will be moments. Every step of great faith is always followed by a moment of great fear, okay? That's natural. But when you say yes more than you say no, God shows up and he does something in your life that only he can do. And he makes your faith real. He makes your faith active. And my guess is some of you are being asked to take a risk. You're just being asked to say yes. And I don't know what that looks like for you, but you're frightened, you're scared. And the question is, will you be obedient? Will you take a job with less pay so you don't have to travel as much and be away from your family? Will you choose to sit with a student that nobody sits with at lunch just because God's asking you to say yes? And it's going to be looked like as this big, audacious thing that you're doing at lunchtime. It's going to be the talk of the lunchroom, but it's just you saying yes. Will you choose to honor God with your finances and start giving and trusting him with your money? Will you break up with the person that you're dating because you know that they pull you further away from God than they do push you toward God? Those are questions only you can answer, right? Those are things that only God is asking you to do. And no one is going to be responsible for your yes or no other than you. And no one can judge you for your yes or no other than you. That's how your faith grows, is just by simply saying yes more than you say no. I've gone over, so let me wrap this up. Finally, a heroic faith perseveres. And for some of you today, you're in a really bad place in your faith. You're just beat down. You feel like God has forgotten you or abandoned you, and you did take a risk, and God didn't show up like you thought he would, and your faith is just wounded right now. Can I just say that I bet every single person that's listed in Hebrews chapter 11 went through getting beat up or feeling abandoned, and they just hung in there. And maybe that's what God is asking you to do today. He recognizes the obstacles, he sees the hurt and the pain, and he's just saying, just hang on. Just hang in there. Hebrews chapter 11 mentions the word faith 27 times. There's only one other phrase in Hebrews chapter 11 that's repeated, and it's only repeated 3 times, but I think it's really significant. It's the phrase, even though. Even though. By faith, even though. They hung on to their faith, even though the odds were stacked against them, even though they felt like God had abandoned them, even though the future was uncertain. And can I just encourage some of you dads, and can I just encourage all the rest of us, that if you're in a dry season of faith, God is saying, hey, just hang on. Persevere even though. Even though your spouse left you, even though you lost your job, even though your grief is overwhelming, even though you feel so alone, even though God seems absent, even though you feel rejected, even though you have no idea how you're going to pay the bills, even though you feel so discouraged. By faith, even though, God will be with you. I wish that pursuing faith and heroic faith, I wish it was like this recipe that we could just put together and just have it just crank out. It's not. It's messy. It's organic. Most of us take 1 step forward and then 2 steps back. But it's the pursuit that matters. It's the willingness to risk that matters. It's the decision to persevere even though it's not playing out like we thought it should. And when that happens, we develop a faith in God that is worthy of passing on to those that we love most. for all the dads, for all the moms, for all the future moms and dads, for all the people who have relationships in their life that they long to live out their faith. God is saying, hey, I'm not asking you for perfection. I'm just asking you for pursuit. Let's pray together.